welcome back to the Conspiracy Couple podcast. I'm Marisa.
And I'm Ethan.
And today we have part 2 of our Salem Witch Trials episode. So if you have not listened to part 1 yet, go onto YouTube, go onto streaming platform of choice, and listen to part 1. You are distracting me.
I am just...
with these hand motions.
I'm adding on.
No, you're not. No, keep them folded on your lap. Anyways, speaking of YouTube, we have YouTube. If you're not watching us, and if you'd love to see our lovely faces,
my hand motion.
Put your hands down. You're distracting me. And yeah, occasionally one of our cats will kind of sweep into the background, and you can see them.
Not really.
Well, yeah, Nova usually is crazy for the first part of the recording, and then she sleeps, and then Domino sleeps
also
the whole time.
Recording is like our cats are never this high to be seen. So you said they'll like come in the background.
If we pick them up.
That's not them slinking into the background.
No, I've seen Domino in the back going to the bathroom before.
Well, we don't have it pointed towards the bathroom anymore.
Anyways, YouTube Conspiracy Couple podcast. Subscribe, turn on post notifications, like this video, and it's a great place to put your theories and your thoughts and what theory you follow, like identify with the most in the comments. We also have an Instagram. And we are in the process, if we have not already made a TikTok, but if we have made a TikTok, then it will be on our Instagram. So, go there if you want.
The link to it will be.
The link to that will be on
You probably also could just search Conspiracy Couple on TikTok and find out whatever our ad is. Whatever it will be.
Whatever it will be. So we're trying to keep you on your toes here.
I'm not. I'm trying to keep you just on your flat feet.
On your flat feet. Also, so our Instagram is Conspiracy Couple. And we post pictures that are updates to the show, photos associated with the episodes.
Things you do on Instagram.
Yeah, pictures of our cats.
People can just... I trust that they know what Instagram is and how it works.
You never know. Anyways, so, do you have anything else you'd like to share before I get into the...
Nothing.
Okay. So, if you not remember what we discussed last week, then listen to the episode again. But if you don't want to do that, we left off with the town of Salem Village in a frenzy after accused witches started naming names and accusing other people of witchcraft. And this overwhelmed the court system. So we talked a little bit about what life was like as a Puritan and what life was like for people living in Salem Village at the time, as well as some of the things that they would have encountered in their daily life. And we also talked about what started the whole thing, when 2 young Puritan girls, Betty Paris and Abigail Williams, the daughter and niece of the minister Samuel Paris, were diagnosed with bewitchment after they started having strange symptoms that no one could understand. And the 2 girls then accused 3 women, the Paris family slave, Tuba, and 2 outcasts in the community, Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne. When we left, the town was shaken up over the accusations of Martha Corey and Rebecca Nurse, who were 2 upstanding women in the church and in the community. And 4-year-old Dorothy Good.
The 4-year-old.
Yes.
The 4-year-old witch.
Ethan cannot get over that because it's outrageous.
She's 4.
It's absolutely outrageous. Yeah, it's like absurd. But that just is kind of a glimpse into the mind space of where these people were at this time. Yeah. So, as I mentioned, the court was completely overwhelmed. They had so many people that were coming in to do these trials, they couldn't handle it. So a special court system was established, which was called the Special Court of Oyer and Terminer, which meant to hear and to decide. And this was established to handle all of the accused witches in the region, not just the town of Salem. As I said, it became so big that it wasn't just a Salem Village thing anymore. So the first woman who was brought before this new court as an accused witch was a woman named Bridget Bishop.
It's a nice name.
It's a great name.
Bridget Bishop.
I love that name. So she was a little bit older and was apparently known for being promiscuous and for being somewhat of a gossip. She was accused of wearing black clothes and odd costumes, which was against Puritan code. This is gray. So black clothes were against Puritan code. And she had actually been accused of being a witch 12 years prior, but was not convicted. Keep your foot off of me.
It's unintentional.
And when she was questioned, she was quoted as saying, "I am as innocent as the child unborn." So she comes in, she's accused, she says, "I'm innocent." June 10th, first verdict was passed down, and Bridget Bishop was found guilty and was the first witch to be convicted and hanged at Gallows Hills. In July, 5 more people were convicted and hanged, 5 more in August, and 8 in September.
Wow.
And one of the wild things that would happen within the court proceedings would be that someone would basically say, someone is about to be afflicted by a witch. And then on cue, one of the accusers would start acting crazy as a confirmation. So like, let's say Bridget's in trial. Someone says, I have a feeling someone's about to be afflicted by the witch. Okay, one of the girls starts screaming in court. And then they would be like, oh my gosh, they were right. Someone was about to be afflicted by a witch.
Feels like an easy way to skew things in your favor.
So it wasn't just women. As I said, it wasn't just women who were hanged. Right. But one of the men who was hanged was the former minister of Salem Village, a man named George Burroughs. And he was accused by some of the accused witches of being their ringleader.
Oh.
So
this is like them trying to get back at him.
I don't know. Because remember, we have this conflict over the new minister. Right. And he's the old minister. So
yeah.
I'm wondering if there's some political stuff in play there. So during his trials, his accusers stated that he was biting them via the use of his spirit while he testified, and they claimed that their bite marks matched his teeth. And many people in the courtroom said that they saw spirits in the courtroom, specifically the spirits of his deceased wives. I don't know how many wives he had that had passed away.
But Puritans could have
if they like if they were widowed.
Oh.
Well, if a man is a widower, he's definitely going to be able to get remarried.
I just thought the Puritans wouldn't be for remarriage.
I think it depends on the circumstances. Like, widowing would be different than divorce.
Well, I feel like they definitely wouldn't be for divorce.
Right. So, they see the spirits of his deceased wives, who they say are thirsting for his justice. And the Chief Justice also suggested that Burroughs had an invisibility cloak.
Harry Potter?
That was given to him by the devil. Oh. And that he used to do the devil's bidding. So he would put the cloak on and he would go do the bidding. And he was convicted. And while he was being hanged, he did something that led to a lot of people who were there watching to question the accuracy of the conviction. So before he was hanged, he was able to recite the Lord's Prayer perfectly, which many people believed would have been impossible for a true witch. That a true witch would not be able to recite scripture. And so after he...
because witches can't read.
Right. So after he recites the Lord's Prayer perfectly, because of course people would go to the hangings and watch, this led to a lot of people to kind of be doubtful over the verdict and the accuracy of the court. So there is, of course, the question of if someone is accused of being a witch, how would the court determine if they were truly a witch? So there were a couple...
By asking, are you a witch? And
yes.
If they say no,
then you're a
they're
witch.
Obviously a witch.
So
and if they say yes, then they're also obviously a witch.
So there are a couple things that were used to help suss out if someone was a witch. So one of the most popular was a thing called a witch cake. So this was rye flour mixed with the urine of the bewitched person. And it was mixed together and baked into a cake. So the cake would then be fed to a dog. And if the dog ate the cake and then started mimicking the behavior of the person who was bewitched, that would confirm that the person was a witch. And the reason they would have dogs eat the cake is because they believed dogs were the animal familiar of witches, not cats, which I thought was interesting.
When did that happen? When did that switch happen, I wonder?
I don't know. So apparently this...
How did they come up with that? Like, if we get the pee of the witch, bake it into a cake, feed it to a dog, if the dog starts acting weird, then she's clearly a witch. That is, like, the most elaborate, out of there...
But then sometimes the dog wouldn't do anything. And then they would still say that they were a witch.
So how does the dog act like the person that's bewitched?
Like, if they start, like, having fits, or, like, contorting, or just acting weird.
So
like
if a dog, like, eats this cake and then it's like, oh, my back itches.
And
I
then,
gotta scratch it.
Yes. So if the dog starts doing anything weird.
So the dog does anything dog-like.
Correct.
If the dog
Anything
acts
weird.
like a dog, it's a witch.
Yes. So apparently, a witch's cake was suggested by one of the neighbors of the Paris family to be made when they started exhibiting these symptoms. So Tituba made the cake and fed it to a dog, and the dog did not react. However, her knowledge of how to make the cake and her knowledge of spells were later used against her as evidence.
Interesting.
So she feeds it to the dog does not do anything, and then they're like, well, you knew how to make it, so you're a witch.
Obviously, if you know how to catch a witch.
So witch's cake was a big one. Of course, a big one was confessions and accusations of other people. An act of witchcraft being witnessed by two people. If the accused had possession of things that were witch-like, such as books that referenced horoscopes or astrology or fortune telling. If the person had above average physical strength. Something called a witch mark. So a witch mark was if a person had like a mole on their body that wasn't sensitive to the touch. Or a strange mole. So like, I have some freckles. Okay, so if I touch that and I don't like feel anything, they would say, okay, that's witchcraft right there. If the accused was a woman, they would have a group of women inspect her body to see if there were any strange marks that might indicate she had been bitten or fed on by a spirit or animal familiar. So basically they have this woman go into the jail, they like have her stripped down, and then they look all over. These strange marks could be moles, birthmarks, an extra nipple, any skin condition, like eczema, anything like that. And apparently members of the community were so scared that these marks could be used against them that they would pick off or burn any moles or blemishes for fear that they might be used as evidence that they were witches. However, the act of attempting to hide the mark would make them look even more guilty to the community. So, like, let's say I'm just like a regular person and I have a mole right here.
Yeah, let's say you're not a witch.
And I have a mole right here. And I'm scared that if someone sees this mole, that they will think I am a witch. So people would cut them off or burn them off. But then if someone saw that they had done that, then they would say that's proof that you're a witch. Because you're trying to hide the evidence. The test that Ethan mentioned was the water test.
I mentioned that last episode.
Yes, last episode. So an accused person would be tied up and thrown into the water. And the idea was that if a person was a witch, the water would reject them because they weren't eligible to do a water baptism.
Well, how does the water reject them?
That the water would reject them and they would be pushed to the surface and they would float.
Oh, so like any human.
Well, they're also tied up. So if they're a witch, they get pushed to the surface.
Yeah, but humans float.
Right, but if the person is innocent, then they would sink. So if the person's innocent, then they drown.
So, which, yeah, I mentioned last time. But humans are naturally buoyant.
I do not feel that way when I go into the water.
Yeah, but you can tread water by just laying on your back.
Okay, well, if you're being thrown into the water, and you're completely tied up, how many people do you think are going to be like, I can tread water laying on my back?
Well, they can't tread water at all because they're tied up.
Exactly. So
but
how
they're
are they
going to float, is what I'm saying. Is they're going to float
Well, Ethan,
naturally.
I think you're thinking too much into this.
No, I don't think you're understanding what I'm saying. Is they're going to come back
so
up.
But not every person naturally floats because people would drown.
Well, yeah,
Anyway. Another one was
For a scientist.
I don't do water, okay? So another test was the touch test. So if one of the accusers was having one of their fits in the courtroom, they would have the accused lay their hand on them to see how they responded. If the person didn't respond and then didn't stop acting up or they continued to have their fit, the person might not be a witch. If the person calmed down and stopped having the fit, that was evidence that she had been placed under a spell by that person. So like, I'm accused, you're one of my accusers and you start having, like, screaming and acting like this. So then if I put my hand on you and you stop, that meant I was a witch. Yeah. That I put you under a spell. However, there is evidence that at least one person faked this touch test. Like, that we know that this person stopped moving on purpose and, like, had a fit, stopped moving on purpose so that they could accuse the person of being a witch. So we know that at least one person faked it.
At least.
At least. Another question, I mentioned it earlier. Are they able to quote scripture? Apparently, witches would not be able to do that.
But were women allowed to read back then?
Well, they would have had it, like, memorized. And that was one of the issues with, like, the church that the Puritans split off of, was that they felt that people, it should not just be the priest who can read scripture, that every person should be able to read scripture.
Oh, so they're a little progressive in their
yes.
scripture reading beliefs.
So apparently there was one accused witch who was reciting, I believe it was the Lord's Prayer, and she, like, switched two of the different parts of the Lord's Prayer. Like, she put them in the wrong order. And they were like, oh, you're definitely a witch. Because you messed up. But bummer. She switched, I think it was like, lead us not into temptation and forgive us our trespasses. I think she swapped those two. And so they convicted her because of that. And
that's unacceptable.
There was a big debate within the court system over whether something called spectral evidence could be used as evidence in the trial. And so spectral evidence included testimony about dreams or visions to convict the accused. So if one of the accusers was having a fit in court, they could say that they were being tormented by the spirit of the accused witch. So they could say, I see their spirit and being tormented by them. And the main issue with this was that it wasn't considered concrete evidence, with one minister saying that it was better that 10 suspected witches be freed than one innocent person be condemned. And apparently no one was convicted on spectral evidence alone, but it had to be confirmed with another piece of evidence. Of course, the criticisms about spectral evidence were pretty much ignored, and they continued to allow it. And the problem was that a lot of the people who didn't agree with what were happening were afraid to speak up.
Right, because then you'd be accused of being a witch.
Yes, because if they say this is not just, like, you're using bad evidence to convict these people, then they would say, well, why do you think that? You're probably a witch too.
Something a witch might say.
Yep. So if someone spoke out, then they automatically had people looking at them.
Yeah.
And of course, it would be really easy for someone to say, well, they're a witch.
Right.
And people would believe them because only a witch would say that this was unjust.
Right.
And a lot of times, the jurors presiding over these cases were related to the accusers. So it wasn't like what's the word? Unbiased jury. It was like, oh, that's my cousin. Like,
yeah.
And I accuse that person.
Seeming a little bit sketchy.
Yes.
I don't know, you know.
Yes.
It's just my opinion, but.
So the common thing in the court was that if someone was accused, admitted guilt, and then pointed the finger at someone else, they would be spared from punishment because the people believed that God himself would punish them. Which, yes, God will punish people. However, if someone refused to admit their guilt, they would be found guilty most times and convicted to be hanged. And so this is because the religious views put a huge emphasis on repentance for wrongdoings and promising that they would never engage in that behavior again. So their whole thing was, we want this person to repent and promise that they will never sin in this way again. Versus, we want to know if this person's actually guilty of something.
Right.
And one person was repeatedly and reportedly told, either confess and be freed or deny and be hanged. And the assumption was not innocent until proven guilty, like we supposedly have now. There are a lot of people who are... Anyways. And the assumption was that if you ended up in court being accused as a witch, you were probably a witch. So if you're accused, there's probably a reason for it. So eventually Governor Phipps, who was the what?
Phipps.
So he was the governor, and he closed down the special court and prohibited further arrests of witches on October 29th.
Probably because he was a witch.
So this was due to a number of different reasons.
Him being a witch being one of them.
I think that the main reason was the fact that his own wife was accused of being a witch.
And he was also a witch.
So he's accused. His wife gets accused of being a witch, and he's like, "Okay, we're done.
No more.
We're done."
I was having fun. Now I'm not.
That's a little too close to home now.
That's how you stand by your wife right there.
You closed down the
shut
court.
It down.
Yeah. And also there he heard the pleas of the people to not use spectral evidence. And so when he closed down this court, that led to the release of many of the accused witches who were waiting in prison.
His witch buddies.
Right. However, there had already been a lot of damage done. 19 people had been hanged. 7 people died in prison waiting for a verdict. And the 71-year-old husband of Martha Corey, Giles, was crushed to death with heavy stones because he refused to testify against his wife. And over 200 people had been accused of witchcraft. All of the people who were hanged were denied proper burials. So a little bit about Giles. So he was sent to trial because he was standing up for his wife.
Wow.
Which led to the people in the community becoming suspicious of him. So he says, "My wife is not a witch." And they're like, "Sounds suspicious."
It's exactly what Mr. Good's fear was, right?
Right. So Giles refused to enter into a plea of either guilty or innocent before the court. So he refused to say anything. And the thought is that if he would have entered into any plea, it's very likely that all of his possessions would be given to the community rather than his own children. And so they needed him to plead either guilty or innocent in order to continue with the trial. So in order to get a plea out of him, they employed the use of an old school interrogation torture, which was called peine forte et dure, which was, they were going to use that to get something out of him.
What was that?
Peine forte et dure. I think that's how you pronounce it. Et de? I don't know.
How do you do, what's the accent?
I don't know, Ethan.
Try it with an accent.
No, I'm not going to. So basically this is like interrogation, but it's torture. And it's terrible. So the way this worked was that if someone refused to enter into a plea, they would have heavier and heavier stones put onto their chest until they either confessed or died. So Giles did not say anything for 2 days before he passed away.
Wow.
And I saw this on a comment on YouTube. I don't know if this is true or not, but someone said like that his last words were like, "Put another one on" or something before he died. But basically, that was what happened if someone stood up for their wife. And he refused to say anything, and he ended up passing away as a result.
Baller.
He is like the real hero of, like, he stood up for his wife and was like, "I'm not going to say anything," and he ended up passing away. And whether that's out of loyalty for her or wanting to make sure that his children got their inheritance.
Either
way. So historians have looked at those who were accused and were able to come up with some commonalities between them. So for the most part, of course, there were some men. They were women between the ages of 30 and in their 70s, and I think Martha was 80, who didn't have like a strong male figure in their life or in their family to protect them. And this was as a result of being unmarried, widowed, or orphaned. And so it sounds weird to say like a man in their life to protect them, but back in this time, women they were really dependent on men to kind of provide for them and to I guess like provide that like financial security, but also that social security. And so like a lot of times like the woman, like it would be like the father would take care, and then if like the father passed away, it'd be a brother, and then it would be transferred to her husband. And we do see that women historically, like if we look at the Bible or in other historic societies, women who were widowed, orphaned, or unmarried were very vulnerable in society. And a lot of them also usually had ownership of property or a business that was considered valuable and were known for criticizing the local government or church, as well as had a history of run-ins with the law. And many of them had been accused of witchcraft in the past. And none of the people who were executed ever admitted to the crime of witchcraft. So if a person was accused, many of the times they were expelled from the church congregation, which would have been huge at that time. The church was their whole life. And all of the accusers in the trials were women between the ages of 9 and 20. So very young women.
Was anyone ever accused, like, more than once?
Like, they would, like, more than one person
Like,
would accuse them?
they were accused, no, like, they were accused, and they were like, yes, I'm a witch, I repent, and so they were exiled, and then they were accused again.
I don't know. I don't know. Thomas Putnam was also a very influential figure in the trial, with a large majority of the accusations stemming from him or his influence. So like his daughter.
His daughter, yeah, you said that in the last episode, right? One of his daughters.
And Putnam Jr., yeah.
Accused a witch.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of the accusations came from his daughter or people that he had influence over.
A rich girl.
And this has led many historians to question whether there was like an agenda for Putnam and Paris to use these accusations to remove any opposition to them or their work within the community.
Or just somebody they didn't like.
Right. So the court of Oyer and Terminier was replaced by the Superior Court of Judicature, and this court did not allow for spectral evidence and resulted in only 3 of 56 people accused being condemned as witches. So once they took the spectral evidence out of it, their accusation rate went real down. So now that we have all of this information and all of the events in this tragedy, now we get to what was behind this? What caused all of this to happen in the first place?
People.
And there are a lot of theories. The first theory is that this was because of a fungus commonly found in rye and wheat called ergot. So it's ergotism is what the disease is called. So this fungus is called ergot, and according to toxicologists, it has been known to cause strange symptoms, including delusions, vomiting, and muscle spasms. And this fungus thrives in warm, damp climates, which was apparently very similar to the swampy areas around the village. And this ergot can infect rye or wheat plants. And rye was the main grain used in the spring or summer and would have been something that these people would have eaten every day. And the drug LSD is actually derived from this plant, from this fungus. So studies on ergot poisoning or ergotism have showed that children are more susceptible to its effects than adults. And that's why I was kind of wondering, like, well, if there was this ergotism, wouldn't everyone be sick? But children are more susceptible.
Oh, wait. So these are like theories about what was happening to like the people who were like affected?
Like, what caused this whole thing to start? Yes, that's a big question. Is what caused the people who? Yeah.
Because I was like, what? I didn't understand what that had to do with people accusing people being witches.
Okay, so the question is, what happened to make this start? So what started it? Was these girls who started acting like...
Gotcha, yes. I'm following now.
So this theory about their ergotism was first proposed in 1976 by psychologist Linda Capariel. However, there are other symptoms that are commonly associated with this, such as disintegrating fingertips. And none of the girls showed this one. But they did show other symptoms. Another theory is delusional psychosis, where these girls, for whatever reason, had a psychosis, a mental issue that just resulted in them having these delusions, that resulted in them acting strangely, having these fits, thinking that they were seeing spirits, all of this kind of thing, that it was maybe more of a mental issue within these girls. Another theory is undiagnosed encephalitis. So encephalitis is a condition that basically is inflammation of the brain. And it can be spread by insects and birds. And so some of the symptoms that result from this include fever, lethargy, headaches, double vision, abnormal eye movements, neck stiffness, muscle spasms, behavior changes, and, as I said, spasms. And some scientists believe that there could have been an outbreak of this condition among young girls in the area. And the question is, would a doctor in that time period be able to diagnose and treat this? Or would they have assumed it was something supernatural as opposed to something physical? Because many times, if a doctor was unable to find an obvious physical cause to someone's problems, they would instead say that it was witchcraft. And witchcraft or bewitchment was a common diagnosis at this time. I mean, just think they didn't even know what germs were. Like, they were still treating things with leeches.
Right. Bloodletting?
So, would they have been able to recognize an inflammation of the brain?
Probably not. Yeah.
Another theory that's been proposed is epilepsy. Of course, epilepsy is when a person has seizures. And so some of the spasms could actually have been seizures that people just didn't know were seizures. So that's one of the theories. Another theory is economic or financial causes. And this was proposed by a Harvard PhD student named Emily Oster. And the winter prior to the trials was one of the worst winters the area had seen. And it was basically what was called a little ice age. And this occurred from 1550 to 1800. But it was especially intense between 1680 and 1730. And this led to a lot of economic problems within the area, as well as food shortages and a decline in population growth, and led to people wanting to kind of scapegoat and blame other people for their problems. So Oster suggests that there was a belief that witches existed and could potentially cause harm to others or control natural forces, such as the weather. So on the other side of the economic theory, as we discussed earlier, there was a divide within Salem Village, the farmers and the merchants. And in a quote from a book about the subject, authors Paul Boyer and Stephanie Nussbaum said, "What was going on was not simply a personal quarrel, an economic dispute, or even a struggle for power, but a moral conflict involving the very nature of the community itself. The fundamental issue was not who was going to control the village, but what its essential character was going to be." So that was a big thing. What is Salem Village? Who are we? And then there's this political and social and economic things that go into that. So as a result of these struggles and the growing tension, this could have led to members from one side of the divide to accuse those on the other side of witchcraft. To kind of get them, and, I mean, what do you think, Beanie? She's so cute. So as you do know, there were people who definitely had a lot of the influence over who accused and who was accused.
Yeah.
Because all of the accusations came from young girls. 2 of the girls were connected to Samuel Parris, and one of them was connected to Putnam.
Yeah.
Another theory was exploitation by Samuel Parris for socio-political gain. And this was actually a theory that was proposed by someone living in the community at the time.
Oh.
And
this is the OG theory.
He believed that Parris encouraged his relatives to make the accusations and then forced Tituba to admit to witchcraft and accuse other witches. So he was like, huh. And of course, Tituba's a slave. She can't say anything about that.
Right. No one's going to believe her.
Right. So at the time, Parris's influence was dwindling. So this man thought that perhaps he used the trials to grab back some of his political influence. Oh my gosh, look at me. Look at my daughters. They're being bewitched by these people, and my slave has been bewitching them. Oh my gosh, and now she's naming names. So people start feeling bad for him. Like, oh my gosh, you poor thing. You have your daughters your daughter is a victim.
Yeah.
And that is something that someone within the community thought at the time. Another theory is mass hysteria. So this contagion of hysteria and fear brought on by the supernatural and the unknown. So mass hysteria is not something that is new in history, and it is definitely something that has happened in the past. The definition of mass hysteria is the rapid spread of conversion disorder, a condition involving the appearance of bodily complaints for which there is no organic basis. In such episodes, psychological distress is converted or channeled into physical symptoms. So, like, mass hysteria has happened. There is something that I think is interesting that I kind of want to look into, which is, like, the dancing plague. It happened in France, where a whole town of people just randomly started dancing. And they did not stop dancing until they died from exhaustion.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the same thing as maybe there was like one girl started acting weird and then the other girl saw her and was like, oh my gosh, she gets scared.
Yeah.
She's acting weird. Other people see her, they get scared, they start acting weird. What if it happens to me? What if it happens to me? They get scared. And then it continues.
Yeah.
And the idea is that the girls were experiencing like hysteria as a result of the difficulty of their life, which in turn created hysteria among the other girls and among the other villagers, which created this whole thing. Another theory is post-traumatic stress brought on by wars and conflict with the Native American tribes near them. So as I mentioned in our first part of the series, there was a lot of conflict going on at this time. Not just with the neighboring Native American tribes, but also with European powers trying to like claim in America. And all of this created a heightened sense of anxiety and fear that more conflict was coming. And many of the girls who made accusations had very likely witnessed the brutality of these events, and it probably caused some trauma or PTSD for them. So a historian named Mary Beth Norton has suggested that the executions could have been trying to shift the blame from their military defeats onto the supernatural as opposed to their own military weaknesses.
Yeah.
And the idea was that if safety as for the community came as a result of getting rid of the witches in the community who were bringing these tragedies onto them, because it was the witches who were causing them to lose. It was the witches who were causing the dissension. It was the witches who were causing wars. So if they could just get rid of the witches and have the community be safe, then the people would have happily jumped at the opportunity because it was probably very traumatic for them.
Yeah.
And there was this fear of, this can happen again, this can happen again. And if they truly believe that witches are causing it, and if they think, if I just get rid of the witches, then we won't have this anymore, then that probably led to them to want to get rid of the witches. Another theory, kids who were bored or wanted attention.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you can imagine that life as a child or teen in this time period would have been pretty boring, as most of their time was to be spent working or studying the Bible, and not really doing anything crazy. So the girls...
So you gotta create your own crazy and
yeah.
accuse people of witchcraft.
So the girls who began this whole thing had spent some time engaging in fortune-telling activities and games, and people question whether they could have felt guilty over their participation in this, because these games are forbidden. And so the idea is they participate in these games because they're bored, they feel guilty because they know what they're doing is not right, and they start acting out. Or maybe they were just bored and wanted to create some excitement in their town.
Yeah.
And the last theory, I don't really think it's a theory, but I'm throwing it in there, is witchcraft. That there were actual witches who lived in the area and bewitched people, and they were actually doing what they said. I mean...
I'm sure not every single one of them was a witch.
Do you believe in witches?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. But I don't think that this is the case.
I've met a witch.
Really? Are you going to say me?
No.
Are you going to say...
No.
Really?
Yeah. Well, like, also kind of depends on, like, your beliefs in Wicca and stuff like that. But I've also been around a witch doctor in my youth.
I do believe that there are people who have some kind of link to the supernatural and can do things physically with that. But I do not think that this was a case of that.
Certainly not every single one.
Wait, okay. So do you want to talk about what your thoughts are on the theories before or after I get into the legacy of the trials?
Up to you.
Let's do the theories.
You're driving the boat.
Okay, let's see let's talk about what your thoughts are first.
Yeah.
What do you think it is?
I'm sure it's a mixture of things. I bet there are some sort of physical ailments that did cause some of those reactions. I'm sure some of it was kids being bored or making things up, or political or social, like, battle and stuff like that. For the most part, I would be inclined to believe that most of the people accused were not witches. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to say 100% that none of them are witches. I could see none of them being witches, but also, like, Maybe. Right?
But you don't think that
I think for the most part,
about...
Yeah. No, I believe what history generally tells us is that it was a case of, like, mass hysteria. And also, people were just trying to survive at a certain point, so they just started accusing each other.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I also agree. I don't think there's, like, you can say one thing. I think that it's probably a mixture of a lot of things. Mm-hmm. I think that...
I mean, there's no doubt there was some cases of mass hysteria for sure.
Right. I think that what it could have very well started as a medical or mental issue.
Yeah, essentially.
Because there was not a lot of medical knowledge at that time. And so anything that they didn't understand. So if they could not obviously physically see something wrong with you.
Right, they just assumed it was supernatural.
Bewitchment.
Yeah.
And so I do think that there is something that started it. And it could be ergotism. I think that, I mean, knowing, because my question with that was, well, why wasn't everyone affected by it? But maybe everyone was affected in a different way. I mean, even if, like, it was this mass hysteria, it could have been mass hysteria that was heightened by LSD, essentially, because that's what this fungus is LSD.
Right, yeah.
So I do think that it probably started as that. The people were probably influenced by fear, for sure, probably post-traumatic stress.
Oh, yeah.
And if you look into their head and just think, like, their brain tells them that if we get rid of witches, we will have peace, we will have food, we will not have to, like, they for sure thought that witches were causing the food shortages, were causing the ice, causing the poor weather, causing the wars, causing all of this. So if they genuinely thought, if we get rid of the witches, then we can have, like, peace, then that could have very easily driven them to want to get rid of the witches. Yeah. But I do think that there was this, like, hysteria, because of course that would have been scary.
Yeah.
And, I mean, they already lived in this sense of spiritual anxiety, which spiritual anxiety is, like, I can't even imagine that, because that just gets to the core of who you are and who your community is.
Yeah.
So I think that it probably started as one thing. I think it probably very well could have been encephalitis or ergotism or epilepsy.
Something, yeah.
And then it ended up to be this hysteria. And I do also think that it was being used by people for economic, political, and social gain.
Yeah.
So I think that it's very sad, because you have all these people, the community members, they probably had the best of intentions. They wanted their community to be safe.
Right.
And then we have people like Paris and Putnam and these people who are ginning up this hysteria, making the hysteria worse, and then using it to kind of get influence. Yeah. And the bottom line is, you have 20 people who died who did not need to die, who should not have died. Yep. And it's very tragic. Yeah. But I don't think that you can pinpoint one thing, because in events like this, I think it's never just one thing. Yeah. We try to oversimplify it so much. Yeah. But the bottom line is, it's a tragedy. Yeah. So the legacy. So even though the hysteria and the trials only lasted for a few months, the damage that has been caused lasted for centuries. So the Massachusetts General Court went back and changed the guilty verdicts of all of those who have been accused and convicted in 1711, as well as giving financial restitutions to their families. And the witch trials have been a topic in pop culture for years, with the famous play The Crucible being inspired by the events and serving as somewhat of a metaphor for the Red Scare in the 1950s. And so instead of witches, it was communists. Yeah. So just recently, actually, on May 27th of this year, the final accused witch was officially exonerated by the state of Massachusetts Senate.
What took them so long?
That's my question. It's 2022. And the Salem Witch Trials also served as a big turning point for how the criminal justice system would be run in the country. So some of the changes that came about were the right to legal counsel for the accused to help in their defense, the right to cross-examine an accuser, and the idea of being innocent until proven guilty.
So some good came out of it.
Yeah, so some good changes. because they weren't allowed legal counsel.
Yeah. It's unfortunate that this had to be the way that happened, but...
Right.
Yeah.
And many people believe that the town of Salem, and specifically Gallows Hill, which is the place where the hangings occurred, is haunted as a result of the many people who were unjustly executed in the area.
Yeah.
I think if you believe in ghosts and hauntings...
Why wouldn't you, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, of course. That's a lot of souls who were unjustly... lives who were unjustly taken.
Or justly taken and they were witches. So why would they be haunting?
But no, they weren't witches. They were all exonerated.
Well, that doesn't mean that they weren't witches, though.
You don't think they were witches. You already said that.
I said I not all of them.
I don't think that they were. I don't think that any of them were, because here's the thing.
All
All of them said they were innocent.
I don't think they were witches either.
I don't think any of them were witches, because here's my thing. It takes a very courageous person to say, I did not do this, and to stand their ground. Even when they know that standing their ground is going to result in their death.
It's true.
That takes a very courageous person.
You're right. Yeah, I don't think any of them were witches.
I know. Of course, we want to hear what you guys think about this topic. It's very tragic, and I think a lot of people just kind of gloss over it as oh yeah, there were a lot of girls who were accused of being witches, and it was a tragedy, and 20 people passed away, 2 dogs were killed.
Yeah, no, you never talked about the dogs.
Because they thought that dogs were the animal familiars. They worked with the devil as well.
Yeah, but you never there was no story with those.
No.
Anyway.
But we want to know what you guys think.
You said that already.
Yes, I said it again already. I'm saying it again. Let us know in the comments what you think could have contributed or could have been the cause. Do you think that there's a particular thing that maybe we didn't talk about? Or do you think that it could have been something we did talk about? We'd love to hear you guys' thoughts. Thank you so much for tuning into this 2-part episode. And we will be back hopefully next week with another episode for you. Bye.
Bye.